How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. And before I get started, I just want to say sorry for being away for a minute. It's been a busy time in my life and it got in the way of making some YouTube content. However, we are back. And as always, we're going to try to provide as much value as possible when it comes to topics that relate to our mental health. And today's topic is a big one that affects a lot of the clients that I see. I want to say maybe 1 out of 3 clients are usually experiencing some type of heartbreak or heartache. This can be a very painful time. So, seeking support from a friend, from a family member, or from a counselor can be very beneficial to you during these times. Oftentimes, we will isolate ourselves and just try to deal with this on our own, but in today's video, I want to tell you a little bit about what can be happening behind the scenes in your mind, how you can adjust and adapt to these things, and what you can do to ultimately get back on your feet and live the life that you want to live on your own terms. So, oftentimes, heartbreak comes in 2 phases. Phase number 1 is usually the loss of routine. This is going to be the text messages, the phone calls, the Netflix shows, anything that you were doing with this person is just going to be ripped out of your routine, and it's going to bring a lot of pain. It's going to bring a lot of emptiness, a lot of, self doubt and things of that nature. During this phase, you may experience some of the most painful and the most powerful feelings. As humans, we're not really good at change, right? Think of the last time that you had to change something, whether it was a workout routine, a job, a school, whatever. It usually is met with a little bit of resistance. So it's important to remember that these feelings are not going to last forever. This will lead you into phase number 2. And phase number 2 is where a lot of people spend most of their time during a breakup. And these are the feelings of unmet expectations. Now, I think it goes without saying that most of us that enter a relationship, we go into it with the expectation that it's going to work out, right? Especially if you're someone that's very intentional with your relationships. And if you meet someone that you want to build a life with, then you never really expect this to end in any way. So, one of the most common thoughts that you will have during this phase is, why did it end? Or maybe, what did I do wrong? What could I have done differently? And sometimes the world doesn't help with this phase, right? You listen to the radio and just about every song talks about heartbreak. One that always stands out to me just because of the way it starts is the one by Bruno Mars. I should have bought you flowers and taking you out to dance and all that. I can tell that that song was written during a breakup because those ruminating thoughts are coming into our head, right? We're trying to see if we could have done something to help prevent this outcome. And the truth of the matter is that for whatever reason a relationship ends, sometimes you may not truly know why it ended. And it's really more of not why did it end, but what can we learn from this? Now, early on, this is not something most people want to hear, but ultimately, this is where the healing usually takes us. You see, when we start to think about why the relationship may have ended, it's going to trigger a lot of feelings. Anger is the most common one. You might start to regret things. You might start to have self-doubt. You might start to even feel some type of shame. But the more dangerous one is loneliness. The thing about loneliness, it's that it's closely associated with our self-beliefs and our self-values, right? What do you believe in? Where does your confidence come from? When we look at relationships, one of the good questions that we can always ask is, why are we in a relationship with this person? If the main reason why you got into a relationship was to try to fill a need that you expect someone else to fulfill, then that's already part of the problem. Ideally, you want to get into a relationship already having worked through a lot of personal issues that you may have. You may want to already define what your values are. That way, when you go into a relationship, you are bringing your values, your self beliefs, and basically your own uniqueness to the relationship. However, if I go into a relationship hoping that someone else will make me feel less lonely or help me feel more self-worth, then I'm putting all the pressure on them. And as a result, if that relationship were to end, then it usually leaves me in a place of self-doubt and loneliness and so on and so forth. So one of the first things that I would do as a counselor is just be there for my client. Let them feel whatever they need to feel. We are all worthy of love. We all deserve to be with someone that truly values us. However, when a relationship ends, it doesn't mean that you cannot feel your feelings. If you want to cry, if you just want to vent. It's very important for a counselor to help people feel like they're safe and they can express their true feelings. I've said this before, but I feel like true therapy really happens when a person can be who they are, can feel safe, and that can truly express what they're feeling. Another thing that I like to keep in mind as a counselor and why counselors can be very beneficial is they can help guide you through the 5 stages of grief. I like to keep these stages in mind because it helps people process the end of something and how we can still move past it in spite of it being over. Now, the 5 stages of grief were essentially designed for losing a loved one, right? Or losing someone. And an ex may not necessarily have passed away. However, there's been some research out there that indicates that the loss of a relationship can be very comparable to losing a loved one. So, understanding these stages can really help you go along the healing journey, which is the ultimate goal after losing a relationship. So, stage number one is usually denial. This is where a lot of people tend to be in shock or disbelieve that the relationship ended. And this denial stage is usually very strong when a relationship ends suddenly. We just didn't see it coming. After the denial stage, people will usually enter a stage that they can stay in for quite a while, and this is anger. Now, I've made videos before about anger, but this is a very powerful emotion, which is very understandable, especially if this is not something that we wanted, right? Oftentimes, when we would deal with a breakup, we didn't want it to end, and that will usually lead us to feeling angry and resentful for not just the person, but just for the relationship itself. Over time, once we start to deal with the anger, we may begin to start bargaining, which is the next stage. In the bargaining stage, we will try to set up a lot of scenarios, right? Essentially, we're trying to bargain with ourselves or with a higher power, right? Those of us that believe in God, we may be asking God why this relationship ended or why it didn't work out. Or, just with ourselves, like, okay, what did I do wrong? What could I have done differently? Going back to that Bruno Mars song, I should have bought her flowers, or, would that have mattered if I did? Once these thoughts begin to ruminate in our mind, this is where it could potentially lead to feelings of depression. Depression is often stimulated by ruminating thoughts. In other words, we're thinking about the same thing over and over. No real solutions come out of it. This is kind of like that analogy that people use sometimes where it's like drinking poison, expecting another person to get damaged. But what's really happening is we're damaging ourselves by constantly thinking about the same thing over and over and not really doing anything about it. However, here's where the good news comes in, because I want to make sure that this video is encouraging as well. Even though the ruminating thoughts may feel overwhelming, you always have a choice as to how to respond to these thoughts. This is where in therapy we try to help clients using a technique that we call reframing, which is trying to see if we can shift the perspective to something else that can be beneficial to you, right? Because if you just constantly keep asking yourself, why did it end? Why me? Why does this always happen to me? Why does nobody love me? Then that doesn't really bring us any benefits. However, if we reframe the situation and maybe we make a list of the things that we do well in our lives, the things that we're good at, the reasons why this person may have been attracted to us, if fate has it, you end up back with this person, then you can be better than you were before. Or if you end up meeting someone else, then you could be better for that person. I know these things are not easy to hear immediately after a breakup, but like I said, this is all a healing journey. And these are things to keep in mind so that we can ultimately get back on our feet and keep living the life that we will ultimately want to live. And the last stage of the grieving process is acceptance. This is where we begin to take responsibility for our actions and we begin to understand that, you know what, this breakup isn't something that defines me. This is just something that happened to me. How we respond in these moments is ultimately what's going to define me. It's very important to remember that during these times, I want to encourage you not to be alone. Now, you will need a little bit of alone time to process some of these things. And some of the things that have worked for clients in the past has been, like I said, reframing your thoughts, journaling, or I've even seen some clients write letters to their ex. And you don't necessarily have to send it to them, but if you think it may help your healing journey, then you can send it in the mail and let it be, right? Now, oftentimes the biggest struggle that I see with breakups is people want closure and they need to understand why it happened or why their ex left or etc. I want to offer some encouragement by saying that the closure doesn't necessarily have to be that. Closure can be a little different. You see, relationships are very reflective and they often show us some of the things that we can improve. A healthy closure could be taking into account the things that we did, how we respond to the things that happen in our relationship. Even though this relationship came to an end, you still have the ability to respond to this breakup. If you seek counsel, if you journal, if you meditate, if you pray, if you talk to a counselor, if you talk to a good confidant, all of these things can help the healing journey and ultimately will lead back to learning a thing or two about this relationship. At the end of the day, relationships are here to make us better. When you're ready, I want to encourage you to take this opportunity to analyze some of the things that you can do better, not only for your next relationship and for others, but for yourself as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hang in there if you're going through a breakup. I promise you that these feelings don't last forever. And if you have any questions or you have any comments about some of the things that I shared, please leave them down below. Till next time, Leo out.